Here are the topics that will be covered in the President's Revision video. This video will focus on the role of the Vice President. Now that we know the powers the President possesses, we can look at the several other factions within the executive branch that can help the President perform their duties. One of these people is the Vice President. Under normal circumstances, the Vice President is elected as part of a joint ticket with the President. In the 2020 elections, the people had a choice of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump and Mike Pence. A big question that is often associated with the vice presidency is how powerful is the position? John McCain, a Republican senator who once ran for office, said the vice presidency has two duties. One to inquire on the daily health of the president, and the other to attend the funerals of third world dictators. Whilst John Adams, the first ever vice president, said that the vice presidency is the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. Let's break down how powerful the role of the Vice President is. Whilst I go through the different aspects of the role of the Vice President, create a table for the role being powerful versus reasons against this. The Constitution originally gave the Vice President 4 powers. Can you think of them? Pause the video here and see how many you can come up with. The Vice President is the presiding officer of the Senate, but this is a function that the Vice President rarely performs. The Senate usually deputes junior members of its chamber to chair debates. The Vice President is also granted the power to break a tie in the Senate. Indeed, it is only to perform this function that a Vice President will usually attend the chamber. Joe Biden never had to use this power, whereas Mike Pence used it 13 times. The Vice President is also given the task of counting and then announcing the results of the Electoral College votes. That meant that in January 2001, outgoing Vice President Al Gore had to announce his own defeat in the previous November election. The first 3 powers are either of little importance or occur rarely. It is the final power that gives the office of the Vice President its potential importance. The Vice President becomes President upon the death, resignation, or removal of the President in office. This has occurred on 9 occasions, 4 times following the assassination of a President, 4 times following the natural death of a President in office, and once following the resignation of a President. This was Richard Nixon in 1974. Recently, the Vice President has acquired a 5th power, which is to become acting President if the President is declared or declares himself disabled. This is another provision of the 25th Amendment. This power has been used 3 times: on the 13th of July 1985, when Reagan was hospitalized briefly, and on the 29th of June 2002 and 21st of July 2007, when George W. Bush required sedation in order to undergo a colonoscopy. On these 2 occasions, Dick Cheney was acting President for just over 2 hours. Looking at the powers that the Vice President has versus the President, or even Congress, they are highly insignificant, thus adding fuel to the fire that the Vice President is not a powerful position. On the other side of the argument, there is a theory that actually the Vice President role is powerful in its own way. For the first 2 decades, the VP was the person who came second in the Electoral College votes. The 12th Amendment changed this and created the joint ticket and made the role of the VP more important. This created a more balanced ticket. For example, if we look at the tickets for the last 3 elections, we can see that the Vice President brings something to the table that the presidential nominee doesn't have. Let's look at the 2008 election, where Barack Obama was running for president. Obama was the younger and inexperienced senator from Illinois, where his vice president, Joe Biden, had been a senator for 36 years and was very familiar with the way Washington works. Biden brought experience to the Obama ticket. In 2016, when Trump was running to office, he chose Mike Pence as his running mate, who had been a governor of Indiana and had served 6 terms as the House of Representatives, and had experience in Washington, versus Trump, who had never held a political office. Again, Pence brought expertise to the table, but he was also from the Midwest, which was identified as a major battleground for Trump, so having Pence on board was also strategic. Biden's running mate was Kamala Harris, who had served as Attorney General and as a Senator for California. Whilst Harris doesn't have as much experience as Biden, she was a strategic running mate as it gave Biden the African American vote, and also her experience in foreign policy was valued from her time as a security advisor under Obama. This is something that Biden didn't have. So the position of Vice President can be seen as strategic when running for an election, but also once the President is in office. However, it can be argued that whilst the Vice President can help win an election, an aide to Vice President Herbert Humphrey once said, "Once the election is over, the Vice President's usefulness is over. He is like the second stage of a rocket. He's damn important going into orbit, but he's always thrown off to burn up in the atmosphere." For much of the 19th century, there were many periods when the VP President was empty, as the Constitution stated nothing about replacing a Vice President during a presidential term. The 25th Amendment changed this in 1967. Thanks to the 25th Amendment, the Vice President can be appointed instead of elected if required. This must be confirmed by a simple majority in both houses. This has happened twice. In 1973, when Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned, having pled no contest to the charge of income tax evasion and was replaced by Gerald Ford. Ford then took over as president, so he had to appoint a new Vice President, Nelson Rockefeller. The 25th Amendment is also important because the Vice President becomes acting President in the event that the President is disabled or unable to perform his duties. Overall consensus since the 1950s is that the role of the Vice President has become more powerful over time. As the role of the President has grown, so has the role of the Vice President. In the 1970s, Mondale was the first Vice President to see the daily briefing and have an office in the West Wing, where the Oval Office is. This has now become a tradition. The role of Vice President is now also seen as a stepping stone to presidential power. Look at George H.W. Bush and Joe Biden. Of 11 Vice Presidents since 1953, 5 have become President and 3 have been elected as party candidates. Also, the role of Vice President is beneficial for others, which is called an insider Vice President. Former Vice Presidents George H.W. Bush, Al Gore, and Dick Cheney have helped presidents with little experience in Washington, such as Reagan, Clinton, and George W. Bush, successfully run for office.